That really grossed out. That wasn't until
All right, welcome to the May 2nd, 2022 MSAD 51 Board of Directors meeting. Thank you all for being here. I'm excited that we have some really great recognition tonight. I can see some of you in the audience are getting ready for the second part of our recognition. But first, we're going to recognize our outgoing student rep, Madison Dalton. So Madison joined the board in the summer of 2020. Is that correct? Beginning of her junior year. And I think we all can line that up to a timeline that's pretty challenging to join a school board as a student who's also trying to navigate the world that we were all trying to navigate at the same time. Madison continued to show up with confidence, with honesty, and I had many times where I was able to chat one-on-one with Madison where you were really honest and really spoke for your students that were your cohorts. And I have learned a lot from you, and I wish that I had the confidence that you do when I was your age. So I admire you for that. So I'd like to open it up to anyone else on the board that would like to speak. I think Madison deserves lots of recognition. This was a hard couple of years. This room was really tense and challenging in a lot of times, and Madison sat here with composure and continued to keep showing up. And so I'm so grateful for your service with us, Madison. Peter.
Well, I think the most important thing for us as a board that she really kept us up to date on what was going on in the high school and not sugar-coated or anything else, but okay, here are some of the real problems we're having. Here are some of the things that are going well. And I think she was the early canary in the coal mine as far as a lot of the mental health issues that are going on with our students. I mean, I can remember when, God, I don't know, it was either the first or second time I was on the school board, and the subject of student representation came up, and I was not in favor of it. And I will say my second time around in this certainly justified doing this. They've served as very, very useful and informative members of the board. So congratulations. I've really enjoyed our many side conversations, and I hope I haven't corrupted you that much.
Thank you. You haven't.
Mike, go ahead.
We all hope that, Peter. Madison, it's been an absolute pleasure. You've brought just a fierce yet thoughtful voice to the board. Not only do I wish I had that composure and confidence when I wish I had it now. So it's just really appreciate everything you've brought here, even on hard topics, is never being afraid to just step up and say what you feel and what you think. And it's always comes from, again, just such a thoughtful place. So you're going to do extraordinary things no matter what you decide. So good luck to you, and thank you for giving us some of your time.
Anyone else like to say anything? Kevin.
I'd love to. Madison, it has been a sheer delight. When you joined, and you could immediately feel your acumen in debate and all those different things, not picking fights, but justifying your position. And I think that you do that exceedingly well. I remember that in early days. You didn't need encouragement to keep speaking up, but I hope desperately that you continue to. The other couple of things that have always jumped out at me, I mean, even though you left early last week, it was for the right reasons. You're one of the hardest working people I've met up here, and you have a reputation that precedes you. I hope that you'll come back and update this board with your successes.
Thank you all so much. This has been an opportunity or I guess I would say of a lifetime. I've learned a lot on the school board, and it's definitely helped me, and will continue to help me even after I'm gone. But thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Madison. We have a little gift for you, so I'm going to walk it over to you.
It's a pony.
A pony?
Madison, I've been dying to know what you're doing next year. Are you willing to share that with us?
I'm going to Emerson.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. right.
College in Boston is a lot of fun. Sometimes too much, but a lot.
Most of the schools I applied to were in Boston for a reason.
All right, moving on to the second part of our recognition, we have jazz band and combo, which is the way it's listed, but that doesn't sound right. So I wonder who could give a little introduction to this?
I bet Mr. Rollins could give a great
would be
introduction.
wonderful.
So thank you for your time tonight. The group before you is our high school jazz band. Our jazz combo is made up of a few members of these students, but what you're going to hear tonight is one song by our big band. And while we're here, I'd like to acknowledge some students that are here. They play in what's called a district jazz festival and a state jazz festival. In addition to that, we have honors jazz festivals. And the honors jazz festival students audition to be part of those, one of which we hosted last week, that district festival. And 8 of the 16 students in that honors jazz festival were students from here at Greeley High School. And those students are, and maybe you can give a quick wave, Isaiah McFetridge, Cam Anderson, Leif Bodie, Matthew Gilbert, Nicholas Theodorus, Jack Airy, Charlie Moore, and Nathan Howell. And they played right here on the stage to represent our community last week. Sure. And so that's a festival that encompasses all the schools from pretty much Portland through Oxford Hills, Telstar. Additionally, these students can audition to be in the State Jazz Festival. Again, it's an audition festival. Anybody in the state can audition to be in those. And of these students, the following were members of that. Isaiah McFetridge, Cam Anderson, Matthew Gilbert, Nicholas Theodorus, Jack Airy, and Nathan Howell. Additionally, we play in a State Jazz Festival, which means this whole band packs up. We went to Hampton Academy and play a set up there. There are judges. Judges provide scores for each ensemble, and I can proudly tell you that this ensemble received, there are 2 schools with matching scores of those, the highest scores, and this band was one of those. Additionally, at the State Jazz Festival, they give awards for Musicianship Awards. They award 5 of them in the state. 2 of the students before you were recipients of those awards. Those 2 students are Cam Anderson and Nathan Howell. And I should mention that one award is given to one student in the state called the Dale Huff Award, which is given to the most outstanding musician in the state. And that was this year awarded to Nathan Howell, our drummer. So congratulations. So with that, we thought we'd give you an opportunity to hear one of the songs that we play at the State Festival. So they're here tonight from all parts of town to be here on time. And so this is a tune called Blue Tiger by Eric Morales.
Thank you so much. here. We've been missing this for a long time. That was beautiful. Well done. Thank you all so much for coming here and giving that to us. That was awesome. Congratulations on all your achievements. Keep playing. You guys are awesome. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Question, what year is the drummer in at Greeley? And where are you going to school? Good for you.
Awesome. Thank you all again. All right, we'll move on to our other business parts of the agenda. We have an item for approval of minutes, but we are going to table that until the next time. What, are you laughing at me?
No, I just said, can you just keep doing that instead of...
Yeah. Yes. So we are going to table the approval of minutes for April 25th as they were not ready for tonight's meeting. So thank you for your patience on that. We'll have that in June to approve. So we will move on to public comment. Is there anyone here that would like to speak? More than welcome to follow the jazz concert. Okay, I don't see anybody. Does anyone have anything for communications? I have one thing I'd like to share, that both towns, knowing that there's elections coming up and new board members joining this board, as we will be saying goodbye to a few, both towns are hosting a Meet the Candidates night. Not New York, North Yarmouth is on the 9th, and Cumberland will be on the 18th, and I encourage anyone to participate in those. I plan on listening. It's a good way to get to know the candidates, and I don't believe there's questions and answers, but it's helpful as we look toward the election in June. Okay, we'll move on to presentations. Our first one is the Long Range Facilities Capital Plan. I'll pass that over to you, Jeff.
All right, good evening. Here to, wow, it is hard to go after the jazz band. They're amazing, just amazing talent there. It's great to hear that, and I agree. It's a great way to start the meeting off. We should have this all the time. So tonight I'm going to be presenting something that should look pretty familiar. It's been talked about at the board level, workshop, and it's also been discussed at the facilities committee level. And it's just a bringing tonight for approval and adoption by the full board a draft long-range facilities plan for the district, and really considering this to be an important, critical early step before any sort of school project is put out to referendum formally by the board or any other work that's done on our facilities long range. So that's why we're here tonight, and why are we having this presentation? The peak enrollment in the SAD's history so far was the year 2001, where the district's enrollment hit 2,421 students. That's the highest it's been in the 55-year-old history of MSAD 51. And at that time, there were 3 other facilities in the district besides the ones that we have today. Of course, the middle school is a newer building, and there was an auxiliary building to the high school that served as the junior high school for many years, as many people know. However, we are 3 facilities short of what we were back in 2001. And the projections that we have, and I'll go into those projections in a couple minutes a little bit more in depth, but by 2031-32, our very latest numbers are projecting that the SAD's total enrollment will surpass that of 2000-2001. So we'll have more students at that point and 3 fewer facilities. Yes, the middle school was added onto about 8 years ago when it opened to GMS 4-8. However, it was a small addition to accommodate some classrooms. And again, we're talking about 3 facilities that are no longer with the district. All were on the smaller side. However, the North Yarmouth Memorial School accommodated 2 of our grades by the time it closed. The Drown Road School accommodated 1 grade by the time it closed, and the Shebig Island School is obviously still open and been renovated, but Shebig Island is no longer part of Cumberland or SAD 51. Just giving you a quick history on that. So the updated enrollment projections done by Rebecca Wandell, and these are as recent as literally last week. She gave final numbers to the district. She's been working on this for, as you know, since last summer. And she had some outstanding areas she needed to review more in depth before she could give us a final report. This is her final report. There's a full report that we are posting on the website for anyone to look at those final numbers, but she is dated at March of 2022, but gave it to me last week, just double checking some things. So her updated, most current numbers at this point show 2,497 students by the year 2031-32. As you can see, the fall of next year, she's projecting 2,123 students in the district. She has updated these numbers, and she has curtailed some of her projections that she had even a few months ago after looking into housing. Starts a little bit more deeply, looking at turnover housing, looking at projections for housing, and looking at in and out migration. And also making sure that she caveats everything by saying that the post-COVID era is a difficult one to judge completely as to whether the enrollment will hold. She said October of 2022, which is when our official counts are taken for next year, will be the time to compare her numbers against those numbers. And she's provided 4 different enrollment models and given us one, which is the one in front of you, that she believes is the best match for what she believes at this time. So the current conditions, taking those numbers, and I'll get back to those numbers in just a minute in a different way. Mabel I. Wilson School's enrollment will be projected now at 735. We had originally projected, based on her numbers back in the summer, that we would have 761 students in 2022-23. She did adjust those numbers down to 735 for the fall of 2022. And these numbers are up from 540 students in 2015. So you can see in about 6-7 years, those numbers have gone up roughly 200 students at the Wilson School, albeit we have many modulars. We have 21 modular rooms. Of course, some of them were placed on the campus as a result of COVID in smaller class sizes, but we also are projecting we need all of those for enrollment-related purposes within the next 2 years. But we do have modulars at Mabel Wilson School and GMS, as you know. Setup costs, Facilities Committee looked at this, whether removing any of these modulars for the next couple of years made sense. In the amount of cost to put those in with utilities, water, et cetera, just made it almost unreasonable financially and otherwise to remove the units. So thus they are in the proposed budget that you'll be voting on tonight. Increasing enrollment necessitates us keeping those modulars for the foreseeable future until a school project is decided on. And the annual leasing cost right now for all 21 units is $335,376, and that excludes any capital costs related to setup or utilities. So the site, obviously, at 80 Gray Road. I'd like to thank board members for walking through that property today with Oak Point earlier this afternoon. Just giving a visual. This is where the school is expected to be put. However, if you see where the yellow arrow is, recent alterations show that that site is moving a little bit further south. So the actual footprint of that building, the proposed building, will be a little bit deeper into the woods and a little bit further away from the ball field and the development. I think the site will be a better site for the school, more natural and more wooded, and it also adjusts for any sort of wetland issues that have arisen. However, the site is very viable at this point. We don't have final reports yet. We'll have final reports. Actually, Oak Point told me today that they think by the end of next week, we should have a preliminary final report and certainly a final report by the end of this month. And that way we'll know all of the wetland vernal pools. We'll have all those reports in, and really all of the initial site work should be done in terms of testing for the viability of this site. At Mabel I. Wilson School, as I mentioned earlier, the enrollment has jumped so much, and the current proposed grade configuration, if the school project passes by voters once put out to referendum, Mabel I. Wilson will become a grades 3 to 5 school. In the meantime, the district, aside from whether the project passes or not, that facility does need improvements and work, and the district applied for revolving renovation funds, which is put out by the legislature and the governor. There have been a period of years where that money has not been available, and thankfully, recently it's been available for us to apply for. This district was awarded $1.5 million in state funds. 50% of it is forgiven, taken off the books, which is about $770,000. The other half of the money would be loaned to the district at 0% interest. So the current money is would be earmarked for replacing many of the windows, not all of them. This money will not replace every window in the facility, but all of the most necessary windows and doors, security upgrades throughout the building, air handling system enhancements, and also retrofitting the bathrooms would be done through the bond project and not through revolving renovation funds, but I wanted to throw that in there, that if voters do pass this project for a new school in North Yarmouth and this becomes an intermediate school, we would need to do that. At this point, we'll be asking the board to set a referendum for the revolving renovation funds for this June. So again, this is separate from the school project referendum, which likely would be held as if the board wishes in the fall. But this is money that we need just to upgrade the facility no matter what its use is. So the proposed new grade span configurations, we are currently a district, obviously with a primary school, a split facility with 2 different schools, grades 4 and 5 and grades 6 through 8 at the middle school. We currently have 800 students in that facility. In Greeley High School, grades 9 to 12, we have 600 students. In Mabel I. Wilson School, currently we have 713 students. We'd be reverting to a proposed grade configuration if the referendum for a new school passes. We would have a primary school pre-K through grade 2 in North Yarmouth. Mabel I. Wilson School would be an intermediate school, grades 3 to 5. The middle school would revert back to grades 6 through 8, which it was before, and the high school would remain 9 through 12 if the project goes through. What does that mean for enrollment, and how do we look at enrollment in determining school size, et cetera? So Rebecca Wandell's updated numbers, again, as of simply last week, and she stated at March 2022, would show you the enrollment numbers by the proposed grade configurations if the new school project passed by voters. Starting in 2025-26, this is assuming that the new school would open either in September of 2025 or September of 2026. We're not sure which year at this point. It's probably closer to 2026, but we don't have an actual determination on that. I'm not going to go through all these numbers. However, I would like to point out that the yellow highlighted boxes are the highest enrollment projections that Rebecca came up with. These numbers do not match her chart that she gave us in the report. The reason being, there's 2 reasons. One is that she was assuming and basing her report on 31 to 33 pre-K students. We're using 48 students with full-time pre-K classes in the event that we have 3-year-olds that we need to program for through the CDS model. That bill died in the legislature this year, but it keeps coming up every year, and we know at some point we will be responsible for students with special needs, and programming for those students in the building would be important. Again, this is not a universal pre-K model at all. It would just be 48 students, but it does increase the assumption from what Rebecca had used for her numbers. And this also includes superintendent agreement students that she's added into different models, however, was not part of the model that I used for making sure all of our numbers are in there. So this gives you a 3% inflation, the superintendent agreement students that we have, which is anywhere from 30 to 35 students annually on superintendent agreements into our district, and then it also makes the assumption for 48 students in pre-K. So using that baseline, these are the numbers. You can see at the highest point, the new primary school would be 607 students. The highest enrollment for the intermediate school or Mabel I. Wilson School would be 593. 611 for the middle school, 68, and 741 for the high school. And you can see those numbers begin to really catch up with the high school later on in the projections. So the highest projected enrollment based on what Rebecca went as far as 2032 would be 2,497 students based on her most recent projections. So this is actually the crux of the presentation. Hopefully this doesn't look new at all. It should look very familiar. This is a draft long-range capital projects plan. These are the priority one areas of this plan. Again, this has been looked at by the Facilities Committee. It's also been presented to the full board previously. So a new primary school, obviously grades pre-K to 2 in North Yarmouth, 80 Gray Road. And this would be based on enrollment increases that I just showed you. It says in this particular draft plan, new construction of a 700-student school. And talking with Oak Point just today, actually, that might be modified slightly down. And I think there's some adjustments to the concept design for the new school that could be made, material adjustments that could be made to downsize that school just slightly based on these new numbers that we've received. But that's a point for discussion. So I think in approving this plan, that piece obviously can be adjusted. The intermediate school, as I mentioned, grades 3 to 5, middle school, and high school. So that's priority one. The second priority one, if the board chooses to adopt this plan tonight, be improving Mabel I. Wilson School, as I mentioned, in advance of making an intermediate school, but also even if it doesn't become a different grade configuration, the facility alone would be upgraded based on the revolving renovation fund money that we're getting from the state of Maine. And in making improvements for Mabel I. Wilson, it's also contingent upon the referendum for other things, such as looking at the cafeteria, retrofitting the bathrooms, and looking at the outdoor play space, the playground, the field, not having modulars on the school grounds, and looking at all those pieces that would come as a result later and be part of the bond for the new school would also wrap in some other improvements to Mabel I. Wilson School outside of the revolving renovation funds. Priority two, if approved by the board tonight, in this long-range capital plan, would be an artificial turf field that would allow more access for playing and longer use of the field for fall and spring. It would not diminish our need for Twin Brook, but it would just open up a lot more options and longer playing time for our teams. So being able to do that is really critical in a growing district, as well as being a good community asset for other purposes. And then priority three, there are two areas: renovating the maintenance in the field house, the maintenance building and the field house, which are both on the main campus here. This is a safety issue. It's been a safety issue for years. We know it. We have maintenance equipment in the field house, as well as a weight room and a snack shack. We'd like to add bathrooms to the field house. That's been a long-standing discussion. And even making some sort of a slight addition to the field house if needed, but certainly in addition to the maintenance building in order to move the maintenance equipment that's in the field house up to the maintenance building and get that equipment out of the field house. Also, as part of priority three would be the renovation of Greeley High School. Even though Greeley High School was renovated now about 17 16, 17 years ago. There were some areas that did not receive attention at the time, or very minimal attention, which would be Greeley Pool, the library, media center, math and science wings. Again, these receive light renovation, but there's other renovations that we certainly would like to do in those areas since they did not get a full renovation. The commons, and then cafeteria, putting windows in the cafeteria, which currently has no windows in there. So that would be really the long-range capital plan is truly these two slides, priorities 1 through 3. And then the only thing I'd like to add is that in annual review, I recommend to the board, if you adopt this plan, that the Facilities Committee annually review this long-range facilities plan to make sure it's viable each year and it's current, responsive, and that the full board should review and approve if there are any adjustments made by the Facilities Committee annually. It would go back to the board for full review and approval. So that's my recommended long-range facilities plan. I know we've talked about having this come before the board for a while, and it's really important prior to putting out some of the major big steps that are included in this, especially priority 1 in this plan.
Thank you, Jeff. I know we are voting on this under our items for action, but while it's all fresh, does anyone have questions or comments? Go ahead, Mike.
I do have a question. So we're using the state revolving renovation fund for Mabel Wilson, which is great. I fully support that. The renovations that we would do to GHS, would that be allowable under the construct of the state revolving fund?
Not for the round that we just completed. So this one's specific just to Mabel I. Wilson School.
I'll clarify my question. Well, I guess that it's two parts. I didn't ask that question well. So do we know if that fund will be available in next year or the year after? And then would that be allowable?
Scott may know if it's already been discussed for next year, but it's been on and off for years. So some years, it's been available, and some years it's just not available at all. It depends if the legislature puts funds into the budget for this purpose.
It's also for specific need too. It has to be a real shown need. Like we had security needs because of doors, windows that didn't open properly, and and other windows in the building that needed work in the HVAC in one room. So that's why we're so high on the priority list for this year.
But again, to do the high school, I just wondered, it's their state money or potentially federal money too, knowing that the infrastructure bill has school renovation funds in there as well.
Yeah, we can always take advantage of applying for those funds whenever they become available. So yes, I believe that some of the stuff at the high school would be subject to the revolving renovation fund. It's just when we get the opportunity to apply for those funds, and there may be opportunities to improve many areas of the high school. We have areas of the high school where the windows don't work properly. We have HVAC that could be upgraded. There's a number of areas that could use some work in high school.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay.
The reason why I ask is just it may be priority 3, but if there's state or federal assistance, hopefully it would jump up the priority.
Yeah, well, this particular money with the revolving renovation fund, we put this whole application together, and it's basically free money.
Right.
Half of it's free, and the rest is interest-free loan. It's an amazing program.
Yeah, I think the important part is that we just want the public to know that the voters do have to vote on accepting the money from the state, and then using it. Obviously, you have to pay it back at 0% interest. The other half is loan. But this June, we would be asking voters, if the board wants to put that forward as a referendum item, to go ahead and to vote on that item so that we can accept those funds from the state. And regardless of what we're doing with the facility at Mabel I. Wilson School, what grade configuration, it's, irregardless at this point, we need to upgrade the facility no matter how it's used.
Anybody else down at that end, Jennifer?
Didn't mean to do that in there. So, Jeff, you had mentioned, I have a couple questions. You had mentioned that we have 30 kids currently under superintendent's agreements. It was my understanding that when our schools were at capacity, that we weren't doing this, and that the only ones that we were accepting were at the high school because we have capacity. Is that the way it currently stands, or are we taking kids at any age at this point?
That is true. Over the last 2 years, we curtailed our superintendent agreements, so I didn't accept any new students.
Right.
So if we had students already in our district that we had taken in, I accepted them
Right.
back, but we didn't take any new students, and we didn't take any new high school students either.
Right.
So it was only the students that we have. So I have been, this year is the first year that I just started looking at superintendent agreements a week ago. And we're going to start accepting students if we have space. Mostly at the high school is where we're getting our requests right now.
Okay. But it seemed like in your model, you're saying that we're going to accept them at any level after we have capacity? Is that what the thought is?
I think Rebecca, she did ask me that question specifically, and she looked at the average of superintendent agreements over many years, and we averaged between 30 and 35. So she used that number, and she asked me, are you going to stay at that level? And I said, we're going to try to stay at that
I would hope that the kids of our taxpayers are the priority, and that our classrooms do not get too large, and that we're accepting kids to sit in those seats that aren't, just based on the superintendent's agreements. I understand there's each situation, that you look at them, but I would hope that we're not accepting a lot of kids when they're increasing our class sizes, or we're having other, resources being used for this.
Yeah, every time there's a student that comes forward that wants to come here, I always check with the principal of the school, make sure that we have enough space for the student. We've said no for that reason alone. In fact, during COVID, we just said no, period.
Right.
Because we didn't want to increase our class sizes. But that's always a consideration.
Okay.
If we don't have space, we don't have space.
Right. Okay. So my next question is, why are we voting on this now? If you could kind of walk me through, if we vote for this plan, are we locked into it?
Nope.
And why are we doing this tonight when I think there's so much up in the air with, one, the turf field that was discussed, a month ago or so, the property for the primary school? And so what would be the benefit of voting it through tonight versus waiting to get things settled down?
So it doesn't lock the board into actually going through with it. It's just a plan itself saying this is what we think. It's basically being transparent with the public and saying this is what we think our needs are right now. There might be components of the plan that just don't go through. For whatever reason, the board chooses not to. So the board has to take, statutory steps basically to say send it to referendum in order to activate any parts of these officially. But this is basically a roadmap saying these are the needs of the district that at this point that we think are the needs of the district. And we're just telling the public these are things on the horizon. I think I don't want to speak for members of the facilities committee necessarily, but my sense of making sure we have this plan in place is that we're not putting out a school project and then saying 3 years from now, by the way, Greeley High School, we got to do something about that pool after all.
Yep.
We want to say these are all the needs that we know of, and over a period of time we hope to get to them, or these would be considered as part of the board's work in putting these forward, but it still requires in the end, the board has to ask the public, do you want to do this? And they have to set a referendum.
I would just hope that we're not tied into this in the fact of that in the fall, if, the math wing at the high school I know needs attention, and that the facilities is just well, it's priority 3, so we're not going to do that. Sometimes we do that with our strategic plan, and we get tied in there, and then I think it's harder and mind you, I won't be on the board going forward, but I think if we have this plan and you're too tied into it, and you're well, this is what we all agreed to, I think to be tied into that, I think we would have to workshop that. I appreciate what the facilities committee is bringing forward and all of that, but I'm not tied into, I get that we need a roadmap, but I can't kind of understand tying ourselves into this and why we need to approve it.
Yeah, and I should have said this too, and it actually should have been part of the presentation. So we have 2 different facility plans. We have one that's the long range, kind of the big one, which is the one I'm presenting tonight. And then we have more of the kind of the roof replacement. We have windows that we know that need to be fixed or replaced. We've got pavement that we know needs to get repaved. We've got kind of those smaller things. And those are part of a 5-year plan that we have, a facilities plan, and that's just using capital money to pick those things off as they come up. They're on a schedule. We know that X number of years we've got to replace a roof at a school. That's different from this plan. And Scott works with Don Foster on that plan. It has been reviewed, I believe, by facilities recently. And that's all that stuff. And then there's another piece of it, which is emergency stuff. Like we know at the math wing, for example, there's window problems. And we've known about that for a while. Had those windows on order, huh?
No, we actually did work on those and replaced mechanisms in them. And
Right.
Or a softball fence that was just fixed today.
Right. So that stuff's not going to be in this plan. This is the big stuff.
Right.
This is big.
But when, say, if you sat there in January of next year and if this isn't really what the plan should be, is facilities going to break it down again, or is everyone locked into this for 3 years?
Nope, it's reviewed.
And maybe I'm beating a dead horse, but I don't feel comfortable voting on supporting something that I don't completely understand what I'm voting on and how taxpayers are going to be tied to this. The turf field, we need a turf field. We're a school that probably needs a turf field, but maybe it needs to be fundraised. Maybe part of it needs to be fundraised. But for people to say, well, it's in the plan, the voters are just going to pay for it, it just needs to get on the that's, I guess, something that I need to understand.
Yeah, and this plan doesn't identify funding sources or timelines or anything like that.
Right.
Just basically, all this plan does is identify the big stuff that we know about at this point. You know, we don't want to say, again, a few years from now, by the way, we forgot to tell you about the pool. We know the pool is, but it may not get done for 15 or 20 years, or who knows when, or it may become a repair that we have to do. We did actually make a repair at the pool not very long ago because it was more of an urgent item. So those are things that are outside of this. But this is kind of the big stuff, knowing we've got aging facilities in certain areas of our district, and we just want to be transparent. Look, yes, we have a school project we're putting out. We want to make sure you know about there's other things down the road. Who knows when we can get to them, but we want to put it just out in one place in one report so people don't say, well, you forgot to tell us that part. Okay.
So
that's it.
Can I ask Peter a question? Because you're the chair of the facilities, right, Peter? Peter. Yes. How long has this plan been worked on in your committee?
Oh, kind of off and on for a couple of years.
Okay.
I think the thing is, Jennifer, we've got a referendum coming up at some point in time. So the public kind of needs to know what's out there in the future. I remember that when we did the GCA, the question was what was out there in the future. And immediately in that future plan was something's got to happen to Wilson. We don't know what. We don't know what the major renovations are, but something's going to happen. So, you get this narrative out in the community. Well, we didn't know about Wilson. We didn't know the stuff had to do. Well, the board and the facilities committee at that time put out a long-range plan, and in there was the fact that something had to be done so that if somebody had done their research, and I can remember I was on the town council at the time and was a strong advocate of the Arts Center at that point, and I did mention at the town council meeting that let's not forget there's something out there major at Wilson that we've got to do and we don't know, but selective amnesia is a disease that kind of like the current COVID, it seems to never go away.
Jennifer, do you have more questions? We can also come back to this.
I think I'm good. I think I just wanted to ask about the superintendent's agreements, how tied in we are, and understanding that the priorities can change in the future, and that
and I think
and I think that people should understand if it's on this list, it could be moved around or other ways to fund it.
Can I ask Jennifer a quick question? Would it be more comfortable if at the top, I mean, it says draft right now, but underneath this header, it said something like, these priorities are subject to change by the board or whatever, you know. Basically, the board has control over what these priorities are. So tonight, we're just asking, or is it, you know, this is what we think is on the horizon. Do you agree with the big stuff? And obviously, it can be revisited by the board any point it wishes to.
I just want to be hesitant to change too much of this before we're just about to vote on it. I think our communications around it is important. I think knowing that this is really our due diligence to show the community that we've got lots of projects and that we're not just asking for a huge project and then saying, well, that's it for the next 10 years. I think that was the goal of being able to put this out, being transparent that this is not, you know, the new school is not the only project down the line. And there is flexibility in this as far as I understand. And one of my first questions was, is there a timeline attached to it? And there isn't. And I think that that gives us that flexibility to say, okay, at the beginning of next year, whoever is chairing facilities, this should be one of their priorities to look at the beginning of that year and say, are we still on board with this priority? That's how I see this plan. I've asked for this plan to come to the board specifically around this time for those reasons, knowing that we're asking the community to understand a big project for the long term of the campus.
I guess I would feel more comfortable if it wasn't so, maybe so specific with where the primary school is when we have so many things up in the air. And that's how I don't know if I could, I probably won't vote for this because there's so many up in the air things with the primary school that naming that specific, I understand that we need to get more facilities for our students. We're just not there yet completely on what the answer is, in my mind. So, okay. Thank you.
Jason and then Kevin.
So I don't have any great issues with priority one items, but I would echo a lot of Jennifer's concerns in general. So this is a pretty important document, and I can see it being used in the future like, well, these were what we were supposed to do, and these were the priorities, and we voted on this, so therefore this is now the path that we should follow because of this document. So I sort of have similar concerns. I was on the facilities committee last time that this plan came up on that call, and you know, the field, there wasn't consensus on where that should lie. So I sort of have an issue with that. I have beyond priority one items, I take issue with that, either flipping two or three or moving number threes up to number twos. I kind of feel like we should be maintaining what we have, which is what those priority three items feel like to me, sort of renovating, bring it back to what they should have been. I feel like that's more important before we put in a turf field, which we can debate at length, but is a new, fancy, shiny thing. So I guess I question whether we even have to vote on this in the first place, but that's my input, is locking these down and showing those priorities as they are. That's going to be used in the future, and that I don't agree with the way that those are laid out. I would suggest we don't vote on it at all, or just accept it as a report, or we vote on priority one items potentially, or we amend it and flip it, or that's my input.
So last year, when you voted on the long-range capital plan, how is it different from this year's?
So there hasn't been a vote on this plan, so
Like
this is the first time.
This is the first time ever?
That this plan is being voted on. Yeah, that we put everything in one place, that we have identified as the large areas that we believe would be going forward at some point. Whether they go forward again, it's up to the board, but just identifying those areas.
I think that was also one of the reasons why I thought it was really important that we brought a plan, because we haven't looked at a plan as a board in a long-term way. So that was also why I thought it was really important that we had something to look at while we're also looking at a big project in the public at the same time.
So there currently isn't a board-adopted plan. There has been, there's a 5-year capital plan, which is all the smaller things.
Okay, that's what I thought.
And that's never been approved by the board. That's more of a facilities committee document.
I'm fully in favor of having a living, working document, something like this that we look at even more often than annually, for sure. We should, the public should be able to find something like this easily to see the roadmap and a very granular version of it. But locking it down with a vote so that it becomes something that is almost an edict, and therefore, here we go, there's the proof, this is what we have to do, that sort of bothers me.
Thank you. I agree, Jason. I just want to say that very loudly. I think a big opportunity, and a few of us are short-timers. I think it is a real opportunity for the district to focus on long-range planning. Now, when you talk about this fantastic facility, and it's shocking that it's filled to capacity tonight, when those conversations were going on about building this building, there were some members of the board that talked about the need to focus on those, on what was going on with Mabel I. Most notably, our former chair, Kate, was adamant about it, and there weren't enough people. And I was one of the ones on the board that didn't question it enough of where that sat in priority. So I think in terms of long-term, it is, it's a gap that's fixable, and it kind of brings me, Peter can talk to what happens here in Cumberland, but I know on the other side of the border in North Yarmouth, very resolute focus on town assets, on when those are acquired, when additional ones are being acquired, really to the extent that there are spreadsheets that would show we've purchased this fire truck in 2010. It is slated for a replacement in 2030, and there are dollar figures attached to that. Now, Scott, I know that you have that for the vehicles in the district. That I know. But some of these things that we look at on here, if our interest is transparency, I would add to that our interest should be predictability. And so some of those things that we can understand, the cost of a new school and acquiring property, well, that is pretty binary. But some of these different things on here, if you're looking at that priority and you can have an understanding, not down to the penny, but to something that says to the district, this is what we're looking at over time, and we can make the right types of decisions in the cadence that make sure that we maximize the use of community dollars, I think that would serve us well. I look at many of these, and this probably isn't fair, Jeff, and I apologize in advance. Some of these feel aspirational, and I'm more focused on things that are actual. And I know that you are too. If you can find time as one of your next priorities next year to look at these, find a dollar value, find out what that looks like over time. I agree with Jennifer. I'm not, and Jason, I'm not sure what a vote buys for you tonight, other than saying that this is the type of focus that I think is going to serve you well.
And I think if we were going to vote on it, I would suggest we have a workshop on it, because I think there should be input besides the facilities committee if it's a votable document, but we can do.
What else? Anybody? Scott, do you have any comments as a director of facilities, as someone that puts this together and has this mostly in your brain, as far as how the board would look at this, in a different way or use this plan?
The only part that I have around it, we've had long-range plans and long-range facilities plans before. When we had peak enrollments years ago, we developed plans around, the need for a middle school, the need for replacing the junior high school that was here. And, Peter, you remember those. I would see it as basically a tool that we would look at and set out there as where we're looking to go towards the future, and possibly put some rough dollar figures around it that we might be able to know where we're heading in the future or what we might be looking at. But I would see it as a tool that the board could use to inform the public of what's coming. So.
Just adding to that, because that is exactly what I'm talking about. But I remember when we had those conversations over in North Yarmouth last year when we began that conversation about the cost of the school. That work of trying to reserve for future events, and I know you've done a fantastic job with that. That's the type of thing that brings about that predictability for folks and helps them not to stare at the ceiling at night.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite frankly the reason why we've been building fund balance in order to anticipate debt service on the new building. And also, when you're looking at these items, tying that into our debt service schedule, so you understand when debt is being reduced or when debt is dropping off in order to take on additional projects or things that are necessary. And eventually what you try to get to is stabilizing your debt service as things drop off, bringing other things on, so that you don't have those spikes in debt service.
That's everything.
Yeah.
I think, so I appreciate the conversation, and I think what I'm remembering as far as kind of bringing this back up to the facilities is that we didn't have this process. We weren't talking about a long-term facilities plan. And so when I started to think about kind of the loose ends as we continue to look at the end of this year, I was like, we really need to look at a plan that looks at all of the things that are ahead of us. So what I'm hearing from the board is that it's a good tool, but it's not necessarily something that we need to vote on. And so what I think, Tom, did you have a comment? I just saw a finger go up.
Sure, yeah.
Okay,
So
go ahead.
I'm a bit more in favor of this than some of my fellow board members are. And correct me if I'm wrong, what we would be voting on here is, this is a signal to the public that on May 2nd, 2022, this is what the district perceives its long-term capital needs to be. It's not binding. We could come back and vote again next week if these needs change. So unless we vehemently disagree on these needs, there's not a lot of harm in a yes vote, but there's also nothing really at stake other than just signaling to the public that we're in agreement that this is what our long-term needs are. So I think we could vote on it, or we could not vote on it. I'm not sure it would make much of a difference.
I think that's a good point. I wanted to just respond to that for a minute. I think asking the board to vote was just more of a, do you agree with this plan, or is there a problem with this plan? I don't want to assume, there's been a lot of discussion about this over the last, I think Peter said 2 years on and off, but we don't want to make assumptions that this is where the board wants to be. We're kind of saying, is this where, it doesn't say you have to tie yourself to, do we have to do a turf field? Do we have to do, the renovation of whatever at the high school? But it's saying these are areas that have been talked about and identified as areas that need work at some point, or could need work. And, is the board in agreement with this, or is this way off base? And again, I think maybe it's just more, there's got to be some sort of disclaimer that might be missing from this plan. It's subject to board action, it's subject to, something like that. But whether the board takes a vote tonight, I think is not as important as their general agreement that this is a tool that can be used. Because I have actually shared this with all of our staff at a staff meeting. I just put it out there as a draft. I said, look, these are just things that just to be aware of. Just an awareness. It wasn't, yes, that we're doing these things. These are things that we might be thinking about doing. Just want to make you aware. And it was used literally for that purpose, like awareness, kind of a signal. These are things that could be looked at. But I know Avery is the one who want to be the facilitator.
Avery and then Kevin?
Yeah. So my question is, I presume by what it's prioritizing is the way that we fund things, or is it prioritizing the way that we address these problems? If that makes sense.
I actually think it's what Tom used the word signal. I think it's a way of signaling to the public that there's other large needs, whenever that may be. It might be 20 years from now that these things get addressed. But right now, these are the things that are big that we're aware of, that we just want to say a new school project is not the only thing.
Okay.
And I do think it came from, and I think Peter said it earlier, when the GCA was being built, there was a narrative that, you know, we're doing this before we do something at Mabel I. Wilson School. But the GCA had been discussed for years prior to it actually being put to referendum. So I do think it's more of a signal of a plan than it is saying, definitely we're doing this and here's the dollar amount. That's how I see it anyway.
So it's more, it's like kind of like how we're going to allocate our attention towards things.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it.
I kind of, I hate going back to things that people have said because, like, I don't like sitting here for 4 hours. But I think Jason made a great point about how, like, an artificial turf field is like, that's a want, not a need, kind of, in my opinion. And I know a lot of people differ on that. Sports is a big part of our community, and people have wanted this for a long time. But, you know, if we don't have air conditioning in parts of the high school, that starts to interfere with students' learning. And I just, that feels like it holds a lot more weight than fake grass.
Kevin?
I could do the old guy story about we didn't have air conditioning.
Or fake grass.
You also didn't have as severe global warming.
Tuna fish in a hot locker after lunch, 7 hours. I don't remember seventh period many days. No, I think that Tom's point helps to clarify, and Jeff, yours did as well. But the reason that I think it's not easy to assign dollar values to these. It's not easy to do the research that might be required to come up with those numbers. But Jennifer and I were at the same event last night down the hall, and people talking about how wonderful it would be to have a new pool. And of course, I was going to call Scott this morning and ask what a pool costs. But if you had dollars in mind, or if you understood what the implication of what your priorities are, it provides, again, that clarity. So it's not easy, but I bet you could find an intern that could help you right out.
Peter?
Yeah, I would agree with Tom's comments that it's a guideline. We can shift the priorities around. We've done this over the last 6 months, but I think it's important that this is out there. We've got school board elections coming up in June, council and select elect. And so I think it's important as the public evaluates the school board candidates and such, if these subjects come up, and they will, my suspicion, especially the new school and probably the turf field, because it's a hot item with groups, that, you know, they've got at least the guidelines of where the board is thinking. And also for the fact with the referendum, if it does come up in November on the schools, as a tool. And I don't think, at least of my experience the last couple of times on the board, if conditions change, that we can't pivot quite immediately to deal with it. So I think this isn't totally cast in stone. I'm of the Tom school of thought that I think we should vote on it when the time comes and let the chips fall where they may.
Okay. Well, we do have another opportunity for discussion when voting comes around. My biggest concern with not having attention to this type of plan is that we lose sight of it. We haven't voted on something like this. We haven't talked about this as a board. It's important. If we don't put this in our process, then we're going to miss something. So I want to make sure this is part of our work every year, that we look at this, we adjust it, and it comes to the board as something that we have to pay attention to. And I don't think we're going to do that unless it's part of our agenda sometimes. So.
Yeah, and it sounds like, you know, maybe some of the softening of the plan might be just a disclaimer that, just to make sure, and I can see where somebody might be worried that a few months from now, someone will look at the plan and say it was board approved. Where is the turf field, or where is the field house getting renovated, or where's the pool? Why isn't it getting done, and when is it getting done? And I think, you know, it's got to be clear, this is just a marker in time. It's just signaling certain big projects, but it's not intended to be rock solid, and certainly there's lots of things that have to happen before any of these things would happen anyway.
You could also tie all these items to our plan of financing that we use in the district in terms of our debt service schedule. So you could look at actually specific years that these may want to be looked at, so.
But Tyler, with other things of this magnitude, we would have a workshop.
Sure, and we would have a workshop on every single one of those priorities anytime that they came to the level of we need to make them happen.
Well, wouldn't we have a workshop to put this together? I mean,
that's the job of the facilities department and committee.
Okay.
I mean, I'm open to workshopping this. I guess I just don't want to lose sight of it.
I don't feel that it's necessary to workshop. I'm very adamant that we do not vote on it. I don't feel that the document even saying that the board can change it is going to have be interpreted the same way going forward. So I'm not in favor of voting on it, so.
Okay. Okay, well, that is our first item for action. We can discuss how we want to adjust that if necessary in a little bit. Any other questions on this before we move on to the next presentation? Jason?
It's a good document. I think we should continue to help it evolve and expand on it and do more like it long-term, more granular, but it does not need to be an item for action. At the town level for planning board, we have various reports that we expect annually. Growth for one is one that I look forward to, and this could be something that's presented, you know, twice a year, put it on the docket, and we continue to make it better and better. But locking it down with a vote gives it different weight and power, and I fear that that can be used wrong.
Fair. Okay, we will continue to digest that before we get to our items for action. All right, we have a superintendent's report, which I think is quite exciting to share.
Is it?
I mean,
Oh, it is.
I'll leave it to you.
Always exciting. So
Sounds
tonight,
kinda
my superintendent's report involves some highlights, talking about secret sauce and an equity event on May 4th. So to get to the highlights, since really it's only been 1 week since I reported to the board, and here is what has happened over the last week or so, quite a bit, and honestly, there's just so much going on that at this point, I don't think we could even put everything into one place. Oops, sorry. Anyway, so high school junior Adele Weaver worked with the rapper Spose, one of Maine's most successful music artists. I thought this was a pretty cool story. Dan Westhoven is the Pathways Specialist, and we have a program here at the high school called the Silo Project, which means students work on individual projects. This is Adele working with, and I don't know this rapper, I actually don't listen to his music, but I actually now want to look him up and find out what kind of music he is working on, and Adele was able to go down and work with him on a single that he is working on. It's supposed to be released, I think, very shortly, but he is a very well-known rapper in the state of Maine, and this is part of the Pathways program. So, also over the last week, Maine award-winning children's author Cynthia Lord visited with 4th and 5th graders last week at the GCA, talking about her latest book called Rules. Answered lots of questions from students. I want to thank 4th grade teacher Sherry McInnes and her colleagues for sponsoring Cynthia. She actually lives in Brunswick. The Best Buddies Maine has recognized the middle school for fundraising efforts and supporting mentoring and friendship with regular education and special education students. So actually great fundraising efforts there. Fifth graders at the middle school, and I know some of this didn't happen in the last week, but we posted it in the last week. We have so many things that are, this is a good thing to have, so many things that are positive going on. We have a backup of positive news right now. But they reenacted the Boston Tea Party as part of their study of the American Revolution. I think that's it for news coverage over the last week. So going to the rest of the superintendent's report. Hopefully there wasn't anything up there. I'm trying a new format, so work with me. Number one in Maine, obviously Greeley High School and Greeley Middle School over the last week. We found out Greeley High School this is the third year in a row, and the second year in a row for Greeley Middle School. So how do we do it? I've been asked that. How do you do it? We've had media attention, et cetera. So it is a big secret. It's the secret sauce. So here it is. And the secret sauce is hardworking, all around fantastic students, dedicated, knowledgeable, and caring teachers and staff, committed, consistent, and effective leadership by our administrators in schools and setting conditions for learning, supportive parents, families, and community members, consistent, coordinated curriculum, professional learning time that's dedicated, and I'd like to hats off to the Wednesday early release time, and a relentless focus on student learning and instruction, despite the, I won't say it, the P word over the last 2 years, or the C word, however you want to look at it. So there's a lot of research on education, but one of the best researchers over the last decade, maybe 15 years, has been a man named John Hattie, who is basically a researcher who looked at all of the research in education and then researched the very best of it all, and set what has largely been considered by many educators, I won't say most, but a majority of educators, I think, in this country now and even internationally, as some of the best ways to educate students that are research-based, and we know they make significant progress. He's written many books on this and done he's got a whole team of researchers that work on this. John Hattie talks about this whole hinge mentality, and his effect sizes are based on a 0.4 effect size, and 0.4 is where that red arrow is on this hinge. The 0.4 means that that's an average growth for a student instructionally over a year, and that's where the research wants to be, is in that green area as an average. Anything below the 0.4 effect size in research doesn't mean that it's not good, except when it gets into the red area. There are areas that are actually reverse student achievement. And believe it or not, things like retention, grade retention, generally speaking, has been found to be significantly not a good thing, except for the very youngest students. It can be positive, but I'm not going to make a broad sweep on that one. But generally speaking, grade retention as kids get older is an example of something that would be in the red zone from research. And then there's things that in the yellow area, which are considered developmental. Students would just pick it up naturally just as they get older, so they're learning naturally. So that has a 0.15 effect size. And then in the orange, would be typical, just an average typical teacher situation with students. And then in the green area, 0.4 would be a teacher who is making sure that students are getting to grade level by the end of each year and are proficient. So that's kind of where Hattie sets in. He says everything beyond that 0.4 is more than a year's growth for a student in education. So everything up through that green, kind of the yellow through the green, is considered a year's growth in education. So this has been vetted out by lots of researchers. People have torn his research apart over the last 15 years, and very few have been able to really argue with it. So this is why we pay attention to this education. So I'm summarizing a lot in one slide, but these are the things that we have been doing in our district for a long time, not just the last 2 years, but I think it really talks about those things beyond the green area. And a lot of districts do these things. A lot of schools do these things. We're not different. That's why I call it the secret sauce question mark. Really? Not really secret. We know that these are things that work. One of them is 1.57. Remember that 0.4 is considered to be a year's growth per student. Schools that do things like these go beyond that 1 year's growth. And it doesn't mean that it does it for all students, but generally speaking, when teachers and principals put these things into place, we see more than 1 year's growth on average for a large number of students. So schools where teachers actually talk together and have dedicated time, like Wednesday early release, for example, or they have it built into their schedule to be meeting as a team, as a department. John Hattie's research has found that it is at the very pinnacle of effective schools, which is 1.57 effect, way over that 0.4 for an average typical year. And I know this is getting weedy, but I think it's fascinating, and I could talk about this all day. 1.44 is students' own expectations of their own learning and how they're going to do. So if they think they're going to do well, and obviously teachers and parents have a lot to do with helping kids get there, but if they think they're going to do okay and they work hard, then they do well. And this is, again, another one of those, this all comes from Hattie, I didn't make this up. 1.28, again, these are way over the typical year for hinge points. Abstract thinking processes. Schools, districts, classrooms that focus on rigor in learning. You know, do you offer a lot of AP? Do you offer a lot of IB? Can kids get to those classes when they get to high school? Are you doing it all the way through? Do you offer those things throughout your schooling? 0.9, again, these are way over the typical year. Teacher credibility. Do you hire good teachers and staff? Do you have the best people in your classrooms? That is huge, and it's kind of, these are obvious. That's why I call it secret sauce. 0.75, clear learning targets. We've worked a lot on clear learning targets in our district over the last few years, almost to the point where I think people just roll their eyes now when we say it, because of course we're doing this. Viable and coherent curriculum. We talk about when we interview teachers. Learning targets. Make it clear. It's not a mystery. Put it up, post it, talk about it. Kids should know what they're learning and why. 0.72, teacher-student relationships. Talking about mental health, especially during this time. And those relationships, we know that this is not rocket science, but it's just been confirmed by research. We know that that is important. 0.67, prior knowledge, essential learning standards. We focused a lot over the last 2 years on the most important learning standards because during the pandemic, we wanted to make sure that kids didn't get to the end of the year in a content area grade level without the most critical learning that they needed for the next grade level. So, and John Hattie has confirmed that that's very important in his researchers. And 0.5, he's done hundreds of these hinge points. He's got lists, and you can Google it. These are just some of them. These are the big ones. 0.52, home environment. We know that students that come from involved and supportive and affirming homes where the parents take an interest in their child's education and they're learning at home too. We know that that's huge. Again, not rocket science, but again, well over that 0.4, which is a typical year for a student. Again, this is like this is like a weeks long thing that I'm giving you, and I'm packaging it in one small thing. But good reminders is that these rankings are just one indicator. They're not the only indicator, they're one indicator. We have many other indicators that our district looks at, and they're in the annual report, and I try to report on those things. A lot of indicators make up our school community and how our students are doing and what makes them tick. We know that it's not one thing for every student. It's so many different things that's important. And recognition doesn't belong to any particular person or group. It belongs to all of our students, staff, families, and the community members who support our district, whether through their taxes, through helping a student make sure they're getting home safely at the end of the day, whatever it is. We have so many people it takes a community to do this. And it's a clear testament to the value that this community, Cumberland North Yarmouth, places on its education in this community. That it cannot happen without a community that cares deeply about the education of children here. That is important, and that's why I say be proud and celebrate, because this is a community that cares a lot about education. Yes, the people can say, oh, U.S. News World Report, it only certain communities would ever get this award and everything, but it takes a lot of things, and it doesn't matter. The number one isn't important. What's important is it affirms that this is a good educational system that is supported by so many people to make this an incredible place for students. So that was the secret sauce. Nothing secret about it. There's nothing saucy about it either. It is what it is. I like pasta, so I use that. So join us this week. I'd like to really put an extra plug out. We put this on social media, newsletters. We're really trying to get this out. Lawrence Alexander will be here in person, and we've partnered, or really the PTO has done really legwork on this, but the Equity Committee has also worked with the PTO, trying to get as many people to come out. Lawrence is going to be here, talk about equity, help continue the process of building an equity plan as we have those conversations. So really excited about him being here, and hope as many people come out in person for this event on Wednesday evening.
Thank you, Jeff. That's a lot to celebrate. I was away last week and kept getting the updates about these acknowledgments of our school, and it was a really wonderful thing to receive, and I hope everybody feels proud to have these. I know when I drove in tonight, they were on the leaderboard, and it was really cool to read. So thank you for that recap, and thanks for continuing to put out the positive news about our school. It's really important. Okay, moving into committee reports. Kevin, would you like to start off with finance?
Sure. So we've got some work in front of us tonight that Mr. Pullen's prepared the warrant statements for us. Critical dates, 5/19 is a Thursday, the district budget meeting, which is...
May 19th.
No, I got that.
Location.
Yes.
Right
It'll
here,
be here.
right here in the GCA.
Right here. On the 14th of June will be the actual referendum, and that can be that is in your own community, and can be done via absentee ballot as well, but not until after the budget referendum meeting. That is all.
We're working on that. Okay, policy. Ann is not here, so.
I can do a quick
Okay.
one and make sure. Can you fix anything I screw up?
Yep.
Sorry, that's a big list. Anyway, so two things. First, thank you to folks for giving us feedback on policy BED, the remote meetings policy that we brought last week. We took that, or we're taking it and working through those, the really helpful comments and suggestions, and we're going to be meeting next week on Tuesday to go through that, as well as an additional policy that we've been working through for a number of months at this point. Also, the second item is today we had a policy committee meeting just before this meeting on policy ACA, the diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. It was a really good, thoughtful discussion, made a few changes to the draft policy, and moved it to come for a first read to the board.
Great, thank you. Jennifer, curriculum?
We have not met, so nothing to report.
Okay. Communications, Mike?
Also haven't met, but we need to do that soon.
Okay. Equity Committee, I'll just kind of echo what Jeff just said about the event that's on this Wednesday. The conversation is really around kind of understanding why this work is important, and I think the more that we can understand why, the better that we can understand the work as a whole. So I hope people are able to attend. I believe that it will be live streamed and recorded, so if you are not able to attend, you should be able to watch at home. And we hope people make it out and participate in some conversation and some small group dialogue. Student reports. Avery, would you like to start?
You know what? I would like to start.
Okay.
All right, I'll talk about France. So I guess one of the big things that happened over the past few weeks is the French exchange trip. It's been, I don't know, it's been postponed a few years, but it happened last week. We spent 4 days, 5 days, we spent some amount of time in Paris. So we flew out to Amsterdam, flew into Paris. We saw like everything in Paris. We woke up around 8 and we got back at the hotel around 11, and we did it all. And then we took a bullet train out to the middle of nowhere in France, and we spent like 12 days out with corresponding kids out in some little villages in Alsace. Sorry, I'm very tired because it wasn't long ago that I got back from France. But yeah, it was a great program, very culturally enriching. I would say that it gives you kind of a new perspective of the world around you here in America and the reasons we do different things the way we do. And I think it really helps you make better informed decisions about how you navigate life. And I encourage anyone who has the opportunity to do this program to do it, because it's great.
I did not go to France. Today was, every senior was supposed to wear their committed college sweatshirt, or the college that they're most likely going to go to, which nothing makes you realize how old you're getting, like graduating or getting close to it. I'm finally understanding how my parents feel when they're like, oh, you guys are getting so old. It was really real today to see people that I remember as 6th graders like coming up and like, yeah, I'm going to college next year. And it's like, that's me too. But everyone's just getting excited for graduation and all of the stuff that comes with it, candlelight, project graduation, the ceremony itself, marching, all of that. So, yeah.
Thank you both so much. You guys got a lot going on. I was just aware that, or just told that I skipped a committee report from facilities. So Peter,
Okay,
please.
I just would quote Avery, the Jimmy Buffett song, "He went to Paris looking for answers to questions that bothered him so."
Well done, Peter.
Facilities, 5 members of the board conducted a walkthrough this afternoon with Oak Point. Very, very educational to actually do the visual of where they're planning things. Personally, I think, and Jason had mentioned to me too, that, and I think the members thought it was very educational. We got to see the famous spring house and the famous vernal pool. And so right now, what's happening is that we're awaiting the DEP and reports on the vernal pool to determine the next steps we take. The facilities committee has pretty much determined that if we do anything, it's going to have to be November, that September is just not going to work. So we should have more within the next couple weeks, but it was very educational to me. I think I could see, depending on where DEP and some of the other stuff comes down, that we could build a school on this site. The other thing that we dealt with in facilities was a proposed agreement with North Yarmouth on Sharps Field. The committee determined that there were many concerns and questions to answer, and that bothered us so. And so we're going to be having a meeting, I believe, on the 16th here at the GCA with SAD 51 and North Yarmouth officials to sort out where we go from here. But I think the select people and the other governmental people in North Yarmouth need to understand that this is going to be a process that takes time. that there are some significant things floating around, so that we would prefer not to be referred to another time as foot dragging. You know, we take looking at this stuff very seriously and trying to sort out what's going to be the best for both entities. So that's all I have.
Thank you. That was an important update, so I appreciate that, Peter. Any ad hoc committee reports? I don't believe so. Okay. All right, thank you all so much. So we will move into items for action. And again, here we are at the Facilities Capital Plan. So I think just hearing from the board that I'd like to table this vote and ask that we review this document at a later date with some of the feedback included as far as how we use this, how this tool is used, and how the public can access it, how the board is responsible for what is being voted on it, because I don't think that as a board we're feeling comfortable moving forward for
Move to table.
a vote.
Second.
All in favor or discussion?
No, non-debatable.
All in favor, thank you. And thank you for the conversation around this. It's important that we have this plan, so I don't want to lose sight of it. I want to continue to have it on our agenda, if not once, if not twice a year.
Agreed, very much.
Yeah.
So I think that was the initial intent of this, to be brought to items for action, but I understand that it needs a bit more tweaks. All right, so moving into our second item for action, do I have a motion for approving teacher contracts, or continuing teacher contracts for 22-23? And Jeff, do you mind speaking to this just a little bit?
Sure. Every year, the board is asked to, we bring nominations for teachers that are moving from first to second year probationary status, and until this year, the law changed. The legislature changed the law so that now second year is the end of the probationary cycle. However, there was one overlap year, which is this year. So third year teachers that are third year teachers this year are also probationary. And so we also nominate teachers going from their probationary status into what we call continuing contract status in the state of Maine. In other states, they call it tenure. In Maine, we call it continuing contract status. It just means that teachers have gone through their probationary period, and so it will be 2 years from now on. And so this year, everyone in their second year and everyone in their third year is now we're nominating those folks to go into continuing contract. So that's what we're asking you to approve tonight. And then teachers that are moving from their first to the second year probationary, we're asking you to approve them for another probationary contract going forward. So that is what is in front of you.
Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or questions?
I have a question for you, Jeff. What sort of process, review process do they have? And has COVID kind of stopped any of that? And are they're still being reviewed in the same way and being observed in the classroom each year the same? Okay.
Yep, administrators, for every probationary teacher, we have a thorough review process, which is several in-person observations of classroom instruction. There's a pre-conference, there's a post-conference, there's written feedback, and then there's a recommendation to me whether or not the teacher should be nominated for another year or continuing contract status. For all probationary teachers, we did not suspend that. So if you remember, the government or the state Department of Education gave us a waiver on whether or not each district could decide if they were going to continue with their entire evaluation process for everyone. However, probationary teachers were not part of that discussion. So we continued our process for anyone who was in their probationary period. So that's, our administrators have done that, continued doing that work.
So everyone on this list has been reviewed in what you're talking?
Yep.
My other question would be, is the one-year teachers that we hired for this year are not included on this list?
They're not
right?
included on this list.
Okay.
Correct.
Any further question or discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Okay, and then a motion for the probationary teacher contracts.
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Questions or discussion? All right, all in favor?
Can I just ask one? I
yes,
just
sorry.
can't help myself, I know it. So on the spreadsheet, what we're voting on is the top tier, and we just voted on the bottom.
Yes, this item right here is the top one, which is
Yep.
people going from year 1 to year 2 probationary. So they're going to go into their second year probationary is what you're approving right now. So what you approved right before was teachers going from year 2 and year 3 into a continuing contract,
Right.
which is what you just voted for.
Okay, and even though it says second year probationary, it's 1 to 2, right, is what we're voting on right now?
Yeah, it just means that this, you're voting on teachers going into their second
second.
probationary
Okay.
year.
I know, you're going to miss me so much next year. You're going to
No,
miss
but
me.
Jennifer, you
Yes,
asked
we
the
are.
questions that other people are thinking about.
But I just can't help
I
myself.
know, but
I just
it's
don't want to
good.
vote on something
It's
I don't,
good.
and then
You can
have
still
to
come and
ask.
ask.
Okay, all right, we're, okay. Go ahead.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you. All right, Kevin, I'm going to pass it up to you for these next few.
Sure, thank you. I move that we approve the fiscal year 2022-2023 proposed budget in the amount of $43,802,526.44.
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
Any discussion or comments here? I know there was a thorough conversation about this at last meeting. I just want to say I wasn't here. I'm fully supportive. I also really appreciated the comments that came from the public. They were great questions, and I encourage everybody to continue to be engaged.
And I would echo that as well, especially the prep that everybody on this body did in advance of last week. And again, to thank the folks on the Finance Committee, Scott and Jeff, for your work on moving this forward.
All in favor? Wonderful, thank you.
The next motion, I move that we call and approve the warrants for the budget meeting and budget validation referendum, and to authorize the notice of amounts adopted be approved in form presented to this meeting, and that a copy of said vote be included with the minutes of this meeting.
Second.
Any discussion or question here?
I would ask if Scott would just, since you have prepared these warrants, since folks don't normally get to see these, do you want to just quickly state for the public what it is that we're doing next?
Sure. What's being voted on is we have to call the election for May, or the district budget meeting for May 19th. And at that district budget meeting, there's a series of warrants articles that are voted on at that meeting by a show of hands. So you're calling that particular meeting as part of this vote. The other part of the vote is to set the district's referendum for the budget validation vote. So at the district budget meeting, whatever is adopted at that district budget meeting on the 19th is what goes forward to the voters for a validation on June 14th. So it's the only place, I always say this, is the only place in America you get to vote twice on the same thing. So there's a more in-depth vote, though, that happens at the district budget meeting, which is more the particulars of specific warrant articles that are set by state statute. The vote at the June 14th has to do with just voting on the budget that was adopted at the district budget meeting. And the notices of the amounts are posted at the polling places. The third part of this would be to approve the warrant for the Revolving Renovation Fund, which is also set for a vote on June 14th. And as we mentioned, there's also, the loan forgiveness part of this. It's a little over 1.5 million. 50.58% is forgiven, and the balance is interest-free. So it's basically free money to do the renovations to Mabel I. Wilson School. In addition to that, there has to be a public hearing on basically on the bond of that project or the financing of that project, and we need to set that for June 2nd, which is right now not a scheduled board meeting, but we need to have a special meeting to do that in order to set that. So, and at that particular meeting, what we'll be talking about is just the issuance of the bonds, any questions that people may have around questions around the Revolving Renovation Fund and what that means. Okay, so that's what we're voting on this evening, and there'll be a number of documents tonight that the board will need to sign, so I would ask that the board stays at the end of the meeting, and we'll start at one end and pass down a whole mess of documents that we need people to sign tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second.
All right, any questions or discussion?
Who was the second? I'm sorry, I have Kevin as making the motion. And
Peter.
Peter? Thank you.
You're fine.
Okay. All in favor? Great, thank you.
Sorry. Finally, I move that the warrant and notice of election of MSAD 51 presented to the meeting be approved, and that a referendum election for the district be called for June 14th, 2022, for the purpose of approving the issuance of bonds or notes of the district for minor capital projects purposes as described therein. It is further voted that the notice of public hearing presented to the meeting be approved, and that a public hearing on the issuance of bonds or notes for minor capital project purposes be held on June 2nd, 2022 at 6:30 p.m. as provided therein.
Second.
Any discussion or questions here?
I need
Jennifer?
to ask a question. So June 2nd, like Scott said, is not currently scheduled, but after this, it will be another Thursday night public hearing, is the same as the one in May.
Go ahead, Scott.
No, it's a similar, it's not the same as the one in May.
Right,
as
but it's
far
on
as
a
that.
Thursday night,
But it's on a Thursday evening,
and
correct?
it's a public hearing.
And it's a public hearing regarding the bonding or the financing of the project.
And there isn't a way to combine them?
No.
Okay.
Thank you. Any further questions?
And can I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
It is class night for graduating seniors. If that makes a difference, does this facility need to be used? Because I'll be attending that. So I just throw that out there. Right, Madison? On Thursday night, it's class night.
I don't know.
I think
I'm gonna
that's
be
being,
honest, I
I think
don't
that's
know.
being changed, but
I thought it was the
I
third.
believe it's the third is being combined as a candlelight,
Oh, okay.
and class night.
Okay, perfect.
We did check with the high school to make sure there was.
So that'll be Friday night.
Yeah, I don't think that's been made public yet, but I guess I just did.
Sounds good. All right, perfect.
Okay, all in favor? Great. Thank you all. And last?
Move to adjourn.
Thank you. And second?
Second.
All in favor? All right, don't leave too quickly. Thank you all so much.
Scott, do you want to give the assignment, though, of signing on the same line as it proceeds
I'll
left
make
to
sure
right?
everybody knows, so.
What does Anna have to do since she's coming?